Here is the current world record progression of the marathon, starting all the way back in 1963. Now, for this opening world record here that was officially recognized by the IAAF, Mary Lepper ran a time of 3 hours, 37 minutes, and 7 seconds. And ever since this moment, now more than 60 years ago, times have been dropping in a rather quick manner. In 1971, we saw the first ever sub-3. In 1975, we saw the first ever sub-240. And in 2001, we saw a woman finally get under 2 hours and 20 minutes, a very impressive barrier that requires nothing short of incredible fitness. As you can see, this progression was starting to level off, meaning that possibly in the future, a 2:17 or a 2 hour and 16 minute marathon might be the absolute limit for a female runner. But this was ultimately not even close to the times that would soon be achieved, because starting in 2019, marathon records started cascading down as Bridget Kosgei ran a 2 hour and 14 minute world record in Chicago, and this was soon followed by Tigist Cipher running a crazy 2 hour and 11 minute marathon in the 2023 Berlin Marathon. This record for many was the absolute pinnacle of road running up to this point. She took down the previous record by more than 2 minutes. She competed with many of the best male runners in the world on this day. And for many, this incredible sub-212 was set to stand for generations. Except they were wrong, because on October 13th of 2024, Ruth Chepngetich from Kenya broke the marathon world record with a time of 2 hours, 9 minutes, and 56 seconds, officially becoming the first ever female runner to not only break 2:11, but she went on to break 2:10. This unbelievable jump took down the previous legendary world record by almost 2 minutes again, completely destroying the notion that marathon world records were starting to stabilize. This kind of improvement really went against all running logic, as for many years the world record was really not even supposed to go under 2:15, or at least it seemed that way. But this was something completely different. This was something that left the marathon world in shock. This performance was so fast that many saw this world record as too good to be true. And, unfortunately, this might actually be the case. Because just a few hours ago, the Athletics Integrity Unit released this statement, stating that they're provisionally suspending Ruth Chepngetich from international running, and the reason for this suspension is the presence of hydrochlorothiazide in her system, or HCTZ for short. For many, this is shocking and unfortunate news, but for others, this is not a surprise in the least. But what exactly does this suspension mean for Ruth, and how exactly does she move forward on this issue? Well, according to the AIU, Ruth tested positive for this substance on March 14th of 2025, just 5 days after her only competition so far this season. And based on the reports, the levels of this compound in her system were incredibly high. At the bottom of this report here, the World Anti-Doping Agency states that the minimal levels of HCTZ have a minimal reporting level of 20, and anything reported below this level is simply reported as negative. However, why don't you go ahead and take a guess at the level of this compound that was found in her system after this competition? Go ahead, I'll give you all a few minutes to think it over. Well, the number was incredibly 3,800, which is 190 times the expected amount, according to this article. This positive test carries with it a possible 2-year suspension, as HCTZ is labeled as an S5 category drug. But this isn't the kind of drug that gives you an outright performance enhancement. What it does is that it works as a masking agent, making it very, very difficult to trace any other illegal substances that an athlete may or may not have in their system. Now, according to the AIU head Brett Clothier, when there is a positive test for diuretics and masking agents, a provisional suspension is not mandatory under the World Anti-Doping Code. Chepngetich was not provisionally suspended by the AIU at the time. However, on April 19th, she opted for a voluntary provisional suspension while the AIU's investigation was ongoing. In the intervening months, the AIU continued its investigation and today issued a notice of charge and imposed its own provisional suspension. Now, I'm not exactly sure why Chepngetich would choose to have her own suspension. This is not anything that I've actually ever heard before, but then again, there's many layers to the system in the AIU, so if you know anything about this, make sure to leave your thoughts down below for us all. Now, what makes this case particularly concerning is that Chepngetich's agent is Federico Rosa, and Ruth is one of many athletes that have recently been caught and is either suspended or outright banned from competition. Since 2014, Ruth is one of 7 athletes that have been caught by the AIU, and these other runners aren't just casual athletes across the globe. These are some of the fastest runners in history, as Rosa's agency sheet includes athletes such as Lawrence Chirono, who's one of the quickest marathon runners of all time on the men's side, with a PB of 2 hours and 3 minutes flat. There's Rita Jeptu, who is a multiple-time Boston Marathon champion, and there's Titus Akiru, who ran a 2:02:57 marathon in 2021 to become one of the very few athletes to ever break 2:03. However, he was caught and banned for 10 years as he was tested positive, but then he was found tampering with medical records. This world record progression chart here on the women's side, ending with such an iconic performance, really might be too good to be true. However, it is still important to remember that we are still in the process of this case unfolding, as Ruth and her agent still have the right to take this case before the disciplinary tribunal of the AIU in order to plead her case. However, for many, they see this as one of the most obvious doping cases of all time, and the iceberg of the issues going on in Kenya have only barely been seen. It really has been a trying time for Kenyan athletes as of late, as many different world-class runners have been caught using performance-enhancing drugs, or they've been found in a similar situation to Ruth Chepngetich. The issues of doping in athletics don't just exist with Kenyan distance runners. However, there has been a slightly disproportionate amount of athletes from Kenya that have experienced these doping issues in some form. And now I would love to hear from all of you about this pretty huge issue. What do you think about this positive test, and what do you think this means for Ruth Chepngetich moving forward? Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, until next time.